All right, it's 2020. You already knew that. It's June 13th. You might not have known that. I don't know. You don't live with me, so you don't know what day I'm doing this on. Today is gonna be something a little different. Doing guitars and bass, how I did go about doing guitars and bass on the Holy Roller song in that video that you just saw. Maybe you haven't seen. If you haven't seen it, scroll down, watch it. And yeah, it's a very simple process. It's nothing crazy. I want to make a video that kind of caters to both ends of the spectrum, whether you're mixing yourself or you're sending out the files to be mixed and produced and blah, 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 working with a producer in that sense. We're going to look at how we did that song in particular with the pre-pro demo stems. In a different video, I'll do MIDI and I'll do drums and I'll do all that stuff, but just for right now, I want to show you how I would build a tone, how I would go about recording it, what I did with that. Enjoy. My setup is super simple. I try not to overcomplicate things. The official recordings for all Spiritbox stuff in the last little while, actually for the singles collection and for these new singles have all been plugins. That's bass and guitar. The only thing that we've ever done outside of that is we used a Kemper for the first EP. I couldn't tell you what profile we used. I couldn't tell you any information about it. All I know is that a Kemper was used. The key to the success of, you know, what I feel like are good tones, and obviously that's subjective, but in our stuff, has been using the same producer for every release. That's been a huge help. So that way everything kind of flows the way it should, and you know, it's just someone that's easy to work with, and you know, if there are any issues here and there, it's easy to just be like, hey, like, I don't like that, let's fix that, you know. It is cool to work with someone that you know. That being said, you know, similar to the Holy Roller guitar and bass tracking video where I kind of touch base on some of this stuff, my setup is an interface going into my laptop. So let's check that out. So this is an Apollo Twin. It's an older one, but they're all the same basically. It's got two inputs, speaker outputs. I don't even think it has MIDI, but it runs on Thunderbolt, and it's really great for a number of reasons. One of the things that makes it so awesome is that you can actually run outboard gear while tracking. So for instance, like on Courtney's vocals, I can run a 1176 compressor, and that will compress all of our vocals on the way in, not after the fact. Same with bass, you know, we can run a compressor on the way in. That's basically all we use is just an 1176 on the way in. You know, they'll clone a Neve, or they'll clone an 1176, or they'll clone some sort of like, you know, high-end EQ or whatever, and you can run that in the chain before it hits your DAW. So for instance, so as you can see here, this is like the little console. It's got these channel strips, and we use a Neve pre, which if you check here, it turns yellow, and then as I'm turning the dial, it turns this. So it reacts in the same way that a real piece of rack gear would. That's how we were able to pump out this single that's coming out in a few weeks. Because of technology like this, it just makes it that much better. Because in a real studio, we would probably use the same shit. You know, we would probably use an 1176 in the vocal, on bass, and this just makes it that much easier. Let's go through what I did on the last session with Holy Roller. So I'll show you how I would come up with tones, but I will also show you how I package them up and send them out. So this will work both ways. This will work for people who will be doing the mixing themselves and like taking care of that whole thing. And this will also work for people who are recording themselves and sending the stems out to someone else. So let's do it. Okay, guitars. So before anything happens with the amp sim or anything like that, I put an EQ before it. Let's take a look at what that sounds like and why I do that. So we have a duck at 250 and a little bump at 1,000. So let's just play that. And I'll kind of solo it for you so you can see why. Do you hear all that like boxiness and just kind of unwanted Like, we don't need that going into the amp. It's gross, so I'm gonna put that back down for a sec. And then from there, this is to taste. I mean, you don't have to do this. And this song too, just because it's like a very bonehead, straightforward, heavy song, I wanted the pick attack to kind of be accented throughout it. So yeah, I did like a small bump at 1,000, which is around the same area that you would hear like a sharp pick attack going, right? So after that, I did that the right and left side. I'll put that back that way now so we can kind of work with both tracks. The FORTIN NTS plugin. This is a crazy, crazy plugin. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to get a good sound right off the bat. So this is stock. Sounds like, you know, just whatever. But that's literally with all the dials just up straight. So we're going to turn oversampling on both of them. And for right now, I'm just going to work with the one and I'm going to center it. The way that I like to approach this is that I will do it soloed just to get it to where I know I'm going to like it. And then afterwards, I'll do it in the full mix and I'll hear everything. Also keep in mind, this is straight up like a quick thing, right? Like I'm not going crazy in depth and showing you the ins and outs of like how I would meticulously spend hours and hours doing this. I'm just showing you how easy it can be to get really great results with just a few plugins here and there. So always, no matter what, we're going to have a drive of some sort in front with a noise gate. For that like balls and like that purr, right? So like, I'm not a big fan of the grind, to be honest. So let's just go straight up tube screamer. Cool. So already in the palm mutes and stuff, I'm kind of hearing that sustain in the purr. Tube screamers are great if you have the drive all the way down and the level cranked. All that's happening is that there's gain going into the amp beforehand and you're actually able to use less gain on the amp head as opposed to cranking the amp head gain and then, you know, it's just loose and flubby. So this just tightens up all the low end basically. Guitar's a mid-range instrument, so I just want to really make that a focus because the bass is going to be there for a reason. So that we can do too is we can just look. Let's see, what's milk? Milk does not sound good. I know that this one sounds pretty decent. I want to get it to a point where it sounds decent by itself and then I have it where afterwards I can kind of like remove stuff. I always want to be removing stuff. I don't want to be adding a bunch, you know what I mean? I just want to work with what I've got in the actual amp head EQ, and then once I get to a point where like I'm stoked on that, I know there's still issues with it, but here's how I'm gonna tame those high-end frequencies. Here's how I'm going to remove that boxiness. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how I go about it. It's not this crazy in-depth process. That sounds really mean, so I'm going to stick with that at the moment. And then from here, like, probably I'm just going to mess around with certain... Because the cab IR is everything. Like, it's about 90% of the tone. Cab IR and mic placement, that's my thing. There's one cab on this, you're kind of stuck, but with the mic placement, you can kind of mess around. 57s just automatically make everything sound way better. So right there, like I can hear that there's some high-end ringing going on. That's okay though, because like I'm not just gonna accept that. I'm now gonna go through stage 2 and like roll off the high end, blah blah blah. I also can take it from here. Dip the presence just a small amount. So from here, I would copy that. I would then paste it onto my right side. Then I'd pan it to the left, pan it to the right, and then I'd listen to it and see what we got. Okay, so like, it's not perfect by any means, but it's definitely pretty sick for like 5 minutes of tweaking. And also, some of you might be like, oh, you used a preset, blah, blah, blah. There's nothing wrong with throwing on a preset to see how someone would go about it and then adjusting to taste. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. You should be using presets. That's why they're there. So I'm going to mute the bass. And we're going to work with that for the moment. I'm also going to delete the old bass and the old rhythm guitars because there's no point in showcasing what this sounds like with that. But just to get the basic level and everything with the drums, and let's see what that sounds So it's cool. It's definitely usable for sure. So from here, I would go to bass. I wouldn't start EQing and getting super specific about it until the bass is introduced, because the bass is going to be everything. That's what ties in 90% of this stuff. So as you saw in the other video, I had a Dingwall NG2. It was direct into the Apollo with the DI. And we used an 1176, and it was doing about 6 decibels of gain reduction during the heaviest peaks. So that's why you kind of see this kind of like you know, the guitars, it's super dynamic. You can see like the peaks. You can't really see all that much of that in here because it was squished. Like, it was really taken care of. Like the 1176, like it just makes everything into like a bar. You know what I mean? Like it's great. It's perfect for bass. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be squished. You know, so that's why that was done like that. I do it on vocals. I do it on bass. 1176 on the way in is great. Bass is super easy nowadays. I know this might just seem like a huge advertisement for Neural DSP, but they have a plugin called the PARALLAX plugin, and it's incredible. I'll show you the before and after. So I'm going to take off these, and I'll show you how I treat bass. So this is the DI. that bass is tuned to drop F sharp. So you get a lot of guys being like, oh, bass shouldn't be tuned that low. You know, Meshuggah tunes their bass the same, like an octave higher than E. They use like a standard 4-string. That's one way of going about it. For sure, it's a great way of doing it. But the fact that nowadays we have the technology that makes detuned bass sound so good, and we have stock basses that you can pick up off the shelf that can tune this low, like take advantage of it. You know, like it's gonna make the fundamental low end sound so much better when it's matching the guitars. I feel like that is the way to go. Like that DI, like those low notes. Ridiculous, the fact that, like here, this part. Crazy. It's crazy that it's that clear and it's not all over the place. Use a thin pick. Don't use a thick one. Use a thin one because it's going to act like a natural compressor, basically. And we are going to first start off by brightening up the DI a little bit. So I chose this Waves EQ, and I'm taking, but you can use any EQ you want. Much like with the guitars, how we're going to EQ before we hit the amp stem, it's the same thing. We're just going to take the 10K, like the brightness of it, like the airiness of it, and we're just going to crank it a little bit. That's all we're doing with this. This is before. And then this is with. To me, that sounds 1,000 times better right off the bat. Because even though it's tuned so low, you still want it to be a bright sounding instrument. You still want it to be noticeable in the mix. There's nothing worse than a dull bass with dull guitars. Which also leads me to the point is that you should be tracking with brand new strings. There's no excuse for it. Track with brand new strings. Have your instrument set up properly for the tuning that you're doing it in, and have it intonated properly. And if you do those things, you're gonna have a good time. You're gonna have a good time. That's the way it goes. So bass has EQ applied to it. It's making the DI a little brighter. Now before we even hit the amp again, we're gonna compress it again. So I used the 1176 with an attack of 3, release at 7, and we're just doing, actually a lot. We're doing like 6 or 7 dB gain reduction. In my opinion, you can't have too much compression on a bass. I just feel like it's the way to go. Like it needs to be glued. It has to sit properly, especially in this low of a tuning. So we've done that. We've EQ'd it. We've compressed it. Now let's hit the amp. Now, when I was doing this and I was monitoring with this, I wasn't fine-tuning all that much. You know what I mean? Like, to me, this is a little gritty. It's a little high-endy, it's a little gritty, so let's play with it for a little bit. You'll notice that I'm using the plugins EQ a lot. In my opinion, I feel like it's good to use the EQs that are presented to you. The less you have to do after the fact, the better. And getting it right at the source, in my opinion, is the way to go. That being said, it doesn't always work like that, and I also am EQing this without ABing it with my guitars and stuff, but just for right off the bat with my ears, this is what I would be doing. And also ABing everything. Like, you'll notice I listen to it with it off, with it on. You hear how boxy that was, and just how kind of like stuff that maybe you wouldn't even really notice was going on, was happening. Like, it's not good. So, and yes, again, this is that All Our Bass Have Abandoned Us preset, but it's tweaked again, because I'm a huge fan of that album. I think it sounds phenomenal. If all of our records could sound like that, I would die happy. So why not try to attempt to use the same type of tone and then just tweak it to my liking, you know what I mean? If it's already 90% there, there's no reason why you can't just kind of use it and as like a template and then just kind of tweak it from there. You may as well. So just without the post EQ, let's hear that with the other guitar, the new guitar I should say, and see how they sit together. Sounds pretty good, actually. Just for no post EQ or anything, I'm pretty into that. Let's go into the process of what I would do to kind of clean this up. So again, we have our guitar sent to a bus, which means that now we can kind of treat all the guitars as one track. So now that I've sent both these to one track, I can solo it, and now I can start doing my thing with some EQing and some shaping that I couldn't do inside the plugin. So I don't do much. I really don't. We're going to use Pro Q3, which is the best EQ money can buy, in my opinion. And first things first, we're going to do some sweeping. Sorry, what I meant to do was this. First thing, actually no, we're not going to do sweeping first. What we're going to do is we're going to take out some low end, we're going to take out some high end, and then we're going to do some sweeping. As you can see, what's so great about this EQ is that it's showing me in real time where I stand with my frequencies. So I don't want to have too much low end because the bass is taking care of that and the kick is also taking care of that too. So having competition in there is not good. We're going to cut that out. And it's to taste. I mean, like, I can do anywhere from like 80 to 100. That's cool with me. And then I will adjust accordingly once I have the mix going so I can hear what's going on there. I'll do a high cut. And let's just hear how much I'm going to be taking off. I don't want to take off too much where I'm like completely losing the character of the guitar. I want to do enough where that shriekiness is like not really that noticeable. You know what I mean? Like, I just want to make it pleasing enough where like I'm not getting nails on a chalkboard, which I know is around 4K, but I kind of reference the high end in that way. It's very similar. It's like a very shitty sound you don't want to have. Let's hear, just with those two moves, let's hear that again. Sweet, so that's sounding way better right off the bat, and I'll actually just do an A-B. right off the bat, it sounds way tighter. So now I'm gonna do some sweeping. So I'm just gonna take this, I'm gonna go like this, and I'm gonna go over some problematic areas that I know are there, and I'm gonna remove them. You can also use this as a visual too, so I'm actually seeing on here. So you can see it and you can also hear it, so I can solo it. And it's, by sweeping I mean we're gonna go like this and just kind of sweep and see what's up. That sucks. I know, probably around here. I know for a fact this area is gonna suck. So you can probably tell that there's been some ballsiness taken out of that after I've done that. I'm trying to be as minimal with it as possible. And there are a lot of problematic areas, but I'm trying to be selective about it. I'm trying to pick the worst ones. We lost a bit of volume, so I'm going to up it a bit more. I'm hearing some nasal stuff going on that I really don't like, so I'm going to try to find it and kill it. Oh yeah, that was bad. That one was really bad. This one here, the 1900, was really bad. So, it might seem extreme. It might seem like it's wild, but like, you know, we're ducking 2-3 decibels at a time, and it's removing a lot of problematic areas, which is important. So let's go ahead and figure out the right moves for the bass. The bass I just sweep. So I'm just going to sweep until I find like the boxiness. Get rid of it. It's right there, so I'm going to get rid of that. There's also a lot of brittleness happening up here, which was kind of colliding with the guitars, which some people might be into keeping, but for me, I'm not really into it. And then from there, I probably take my high, do a little cut there, but I want to make sure that I'm really cranking it. And then let's see what this is here. Little concerned about this area popping up a little bit. So another thing that the Pro Q can do is it can kind of notch it down anytime it's going past a certain point where you set it. So I'm going to set it to be about like, I don't know, half a dB. That way everything is super consistent. And then from here as well, I can kind of hear that I want more drive. So I can do that. I just add it in after the fact because we're using plugins and that's why they're so simple. So now, before that EQ, this is what we had. Let it do its thing. It's so much more concentrated, it sounds tighter, it sounds thicker, and it just sounds ballsier. So now, let's hear that combined with the guitars. Now I got a bonehead part. So the guitars are kind of dull. I think we need to add some brightness and we also need to kind of clear up some of the mud. So there is this trick where you use C4 made by Waves. You put it in the frequency of where the guitars are. And anytime that you hear a chug, it kind of does what I did with the bass there, where it ducks it a little bit so it comes through and doesn't make it muddy. So let's hear that with that engage, what that is. Without. It just does like the slightest bit of clearing out that area, which is problematic when you have like really long chugging parts. They can kind of just get muddy, so it kind of concentrates it in a way. And then from here, honestly, like I would just take some high end and add it back in. So we removed high end here, but now what we can do is we can kind of go in and find like the 10K area, which is like basically the air of the cab. And we can kind of put that in there and breathe some life into the guitars. So without that in the mix, they sound like this. This is with. So those guitars are pretty dark, but then when you add it in, it just makes it more exciting. It just makes it kind of like pop off a little bit, you know? sounding really good to me. I think that sounds great. The only other thing that I would do, and this is kind of like an older trick in the book, is you can do this to taste. Like, you don't have to do this, but a lot of people will mix in the raw bass DI with the affected. So what I have here is just what this is. So it sounds like this, right? And I have that here. I copied and pasted the same DI down, and I'm just gonna blend it in. So now it's kind of like poking out a little bit more. Let's hear it in the mix. Pretty good. I would probably leave it at that and take a break, and then from there I would just fine tune. I'd do some more sweeping. I'd figure out, you know, if I was going to commit to this amp head, if I was going to commit to these plugins. I just wanted to give you guys an idea as to how we go about doing it, how I would personally mix, and what we've been doing with the band this whole entire time. All of it is just DI recording. All of it is very straightforward. As long as you have everything clean going on the way in, and there's no clipping, there's no limit as to what you can do. You don't need a fancy studio. You don't need to do all that. And on that note as well, just to kind of sum up how I would do this to send to a producer, let's say that I was like, all right, everything's great. The guitars are edited, they're tight, everything's good to go. I literally would just take the length of the song like this in this window, and then I would just make everything center. I would zero everything out volume wise, so it was all what you see here at 0 and it wasn't clipping, and I'd solo each thing with each plugin off. I'd render out waves. I'd put them in a file, I'd send them over. I would just make sure that I knew the right bit rate and everything, and set my project to that. And through that, he's able to drop in the files on his end, and then he can go about doing the same thing. You can even send it to him with the affected signal if you were really dedicated to that guitar tone. And you can say, hey, work with these, you know. It's that easy. There's no magic around it or anything. So that's how I go about doing all that from start to finish. All right, if you made it through this, I'm sure this video is going to be like over half an hour long. If you made it through, kudos. I don't really have a prize for you at all or anything. But I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being on our Patreon and supporting us. I know a lot of these methods and the stuff that I was showing you I know it's not revolutionary. I know it's not really unheard of by any means. It's pretty simple stuff. But at the end of the day, you know, some people really wanted to see it, and they wanted to see, you know, how I would go about doing it. And that's just kind of my mentality. Just keep it simple, and you know, you get good results. Like, as long as you have brand new strings, as long as your playing's tight, there's no reason why it shouldn't sound good. You know, it's not really that complicated. But again, thank you so much for being on our Patreon. Thank you for supporting us. And there's gonna be a lot more of these. If you want to see something in particular, if you want to give some ideas for some new videos, please let me know. I will put them together, and I will try to help you out to the best of my ability. Holy Roller is gonna come out in a few weeks, and I hope you enjoyed this. And that's it. We're done. You can close the window. You can turn off the computer. You can go outside. Go outside. You should. It's been half an hour. You should go outside.